morning. Today we are gathering to have a chat about writing and more specifically the ways in which we write. About a month ago in late January, I published a LinkedIn article about all these different ways that we can write. So we can type, we can handwrite, we can dictate, we can use our cell phones for any combination of those things. We can use tablets, we can use computers. So as writers, we have a wealth of options at our disposal right now. And I'm genuinely curious to hear not just from us, the WSIP staff, but from all of our clients, past and present, about how you write, and what shapes your choice of writing implement or writing tool. So I can get us started. I tend to write a lot on the computer these days, but I've found that if I'm writing something more creative, I like to write song parodies for my friends' birthdays and things like that. And when I'm creating something along those lines, often I will use my cell phone. I might even record myself just saying some of the lyrics using a dictation tool, or I might be typing on the phone. And sometimes I also like to handwrite in those situations. So I'm pretty flexible, but when it's more academic, I tend to type, and in other genres, less so. So let's open it up for just a conversation. Does anyone have a preferred way of writing, and does it change depending on what you're writing?
For me, for sure, I feel like sometimes I have to type. I can't do anything except type, and it needs to be on the computer. And it needs to be on the laptop even. Sometimes I can't manage the desktop keyboard. It's too weird, it's too different, it's too big, whatever. And then other times I can't function on the computer anymore. And I have to write by hand. And I get out a notebook or I pull some paper out of the printer and write that way. And also when I think about what languages I'm working in, if it's English or French, then basically all my usual methods are at my disposal. But when I'm trying to write even short things in Turkish, it has to be on the phone or by hand because I don't know the Turkish keyboard yet. So when I'm using the computer, even though I have the Turkish keyboard installed, it's this such a long process. I have to Google what key am I supposed to hit for this letter, you know? But on the phone, it's so easy. So yeah, yeah, I find yeah, I kind of use them all. And even sometimes just the notes app on my phone, that's actually where I can think. Because it's just that screen somehow. I don't know. There's just something about it. It depends a lot on just where I'm at in the moment, mentally.
And linguistically, right?
Right, exactly.
So that's interesting because when I make notes, they have to be on paper. I have a million scrap pieces of paper around with notes and even brainstorming. It has to be on paper. And then eventually it can go on the screen. And I write by hand also when I'm stuck at the computer. So usually I always write on the computer, but if I'm stuck, then I have to take a piece of paper and a pen and go away from the computer, just go outside, go somewhere else. And then it helps. But if it's just something notes, I try to use the notes on the computer, useless. On the phone, useless. It doesn't work. For me, the phone is the phone and email. There is nothing else. And when I do the voice, sometimes I do that when I try to get unstuck, actually. And it works if I do it on the computer. I have not done it on the phone yet again, because I see the phone more as a phone. I'm kind of retro for that. I use it only when it's really needed, but not for the extra perks. But I have used the voice to text on, especially on Google Docs, and that's sometimes helpful.
I realized I use the phone for dictation when I need movement to think.
That makes sense.
So then I walk and dictate what I'm working on. Yeah.
I think one of the things I'm learning about myself is that it's not so much whether I'm doing writing by by traditional hand or by typing, but it's more the size, the space that I'm writing in. So I've realized that I function better if I'm writing in a small little space, a confined space. So I am the post-it person. And I on screen, I make my documents pretty small. I will, if I'm feeling stuck, I'll often write emails to myself, and that helps me. It reduces the frame, and I've even used PowerPoint in order to write. So just thinking about that, like somehow it has to be this small space, um, and that helps. But I think kind of similar to what Karen is saying, where are you? What are you doing in the moment? And what do you have with you? I mean, I think about like from the time I was little, I always carried this huge bag. And if you've seen me on campus or around, I'm usually still carrying a huge bag. It's been an exercise to try to reduce to a small purse. But I always had like 2 notebooks and Post-its and multiple pens. And if I could fit my laptop without causing major back pain, I probably would. Just because any type of writing utensil I might need at any given moment, and I might need to try one and then give up and try a different one. It's really hard. It's really, it takes a lot of concentration to figure out where should I put my idea, what's going to work, to get this idea going and to make me feel like I'm producing here.
I have used PowerPoints too, but
Yeah.
that it was more for outlining, because somehow if I write an outline on a Word document, it doesn't look the same if it's on a PowerPoint. It's more organized in a PowerPoint because, as you say, you can only see that page. You cannot see what's next. So same idea of the sticky notes when I have to make notes for myself. That's interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've used PowerPoint too because like when I gave a series of workshops and then I needed to write like the guide to those workshops afterwards, like I just ended up using the notes function on PowerPoint, and like literally following the slides that I had already made and just thinking back to like what discussion arose and everything. And then I worked with another student later who actually composed her dissertation that way. I think we all worked with her at some point, Millie Pepion, Dr. Millie Pepion now. Like she, like made the PowerPoint slides for each of her different articles. She had a 4 article dissertation instead of a 3 article one, so a lot on her plate. And so she made the PowerPoints, gave the presentation, and then she used the transcript from giving the presentation as her draft, which she edited. And since we were talking about that process, I was like, hey, I'm going to go back to writing on PowerPoint, even if I didn't already give the presentation. And I started, like Nadia says, like drafting outlines in PowerPoint as though it were going to be a presentation, and then writing it that way, either copying that into Word, like the outline, and then writing in Word, or just writing in the notes function in PowerPoint and then copying it over. And like, I don't know,
I think
for me,
that
it's really been helpful.
I think that strategy of using PowerPoint is also a really powerful one in terms of making sure you're telling a story. So for those writers who are working on a really big project where it's very easy to get lost in the details and lose sight of the big picture, going back to, well, how would I present this if I were actually talking about it, I think sometimes is really, really helpful.
Mhm. And I feel like maybe this is also kind of what Scrivener as a software is supposed to do, but I just haven't used it myself. I've worked with folks using it, and like when I watch them move stuff around,
Right.
like it looks kind of similar, but
Yeah.
yeah. It is funny though. I think that for emails, sometimes I have to like take notes on paper to like kind of like think about like, do I have all the pieces that I need here? Like, am I remembering everything? And then I can write the email. Sometimes when I sit down and just try to write an email, I'm like, I don't know what to do. Even though have been writing emails for a lot of years.
All right, I saw Tammy nodding just now. Tammy, sorry to put you on the spot, but you know, we know you do a lot of professional writing, including emails. Do you find you have to use paper sometimes too, or do you just jump right into typing, or what's your process like?
These are all my papers and my writings. I'm just like Nadia, like really everything goes on paper first. I don't know if that's like you, Nadia. Sorry, I thought you said a lot was
A
on
lot of
paper.
paper here on my desk. Yes.
And in fact, Monday, that was my, whoops, my goal was to get rid of all my little papers. So yeah, I write a lot on paper.
I
Even
used
if
to
it
do a lot of
eventually goes to
sticky
the computer.
notes.
Yes, and then eventually to the computer, yes.
Yeah, I
Sorry,
just
Karen, what were you
realized
just saying?
I used to do a lot of sticky notes too, but I just kind of realized that I think I stopped doing that when, I don't know, something about like how many different spaces I work in. Um, it started to be like, the sticky notes were losing their sticky because I'd have to like take them down from here and put them all and then put it in my bag and go somewhere, and then I'd like lose 3 sticky notes and now I lose the sticky notes themselves all the time. Like I know there are like 8, you know, bricks of sticky notes like in this house, and I can't find any of them right now. But yeah, in my past, some past colleagues used to tease me about my sticky notes, and I would come to my desk and find a new sticky note on my desk that would say gratuitous post-it note.
Love that.
I've been working with a student who realized recently that, she's been having a block. She's at the end of the dissertation stage, and she's stuck. And she's got all this text. She knows what she's doing, and we've tried all these different strategies, and finally I asked her, "Have you printed it out?" And she said, "Yeah, I printed it out." This is what she's doing, the articles as well. So for her last draft, she had printed it out and then responded to herself in handwriting, just notes on the draft. And that's all it took. She was able to finalize that draft, but she didn't do it with the next article. And that's where she was stuck, right? It was still living only in the computer and she couldn't get past it. And so she had that moment of, oh, I have to do that with this one too, and just that realization of, oh, this worked for me, oh, this is a practice. And I probably wouldn't have thought of it because that hasn't worked for me recently. So it's nice to hear, like, what are the things that are working for people, and being okay with, like, okay, that process would never work for me. Like, I sometimes when I've seen people using Scrivener, I'm amazed. And then the longer I watch them, the more overwhelmed I get because it's too much for me. I can't with not knowing where things are, like to go in and out and like, oh my God, where'd it go? But it's working for you, then keep using it, right? Like that's the point. If it's working for you, go with it.
I used to do that too for every single final or sort of final draft.
Yeah, me too.
And then what stopped it is that I stopped having a regular access to a printer. And now it's just like change glasses, what works better. Now it's just like computer. So I have not read on paper like for revision in a long time. So I'm actually curious to see if it still works or not, because it worked really well. But yeah, it's been at least a few years.
So what do we tell students who bring that point up? I mean, that's a great point. Like, I don't have access to a printer. That's costly, or I don't, that's an environmental
right
thing I don't want to do.
Well, those turn into sticky notes for me after. So every single paper here has been recycled. But from an access perspective, I started printing only the extreme necessary parts. And sometimes even reading it, I would email it to my iPad, and that's also like a different type of reading.
Mhm.
And then now I have like a pen that you can write on the iPad. So I started sometimes making notes on that. But then I have to go in front of the computer with the iPad on one side and the computer just like having two screens. And so that has kind of helped out.
Yeah, I do open stuff on my phone sometimes to have like
Yeah.
a separate screen.
Yeah, the phone is too small for me to read something.
Yeah.
I need to see the full page
Okay.
or, at least like the full width of the page. I cannot keep going back and forth. So that's why the iPad, I'm able to size it in the right way with also like the screen that I have. And using the pen or even with the finger, you can do that. Depending on the app you have, you can highlight something. And that's for me the reminder to do it on the screen. So that is the one thing that has helped to not having a printer.
My mentor, Muriel Civil Troike, always like composed on index cards. Like when we were working on, books, like, she would come to meetings with a few papers, a copy of whatever largest draft we had recently printed out, and a stack of note cards. And she would be like sifting through the note cards and be like, well, when we were talking about Klein and Purdue, last time we said this, but I realized that really connects to this other thing in chapter 7. And then she'd pull a different stack of note cards out. And that was the chapter 7 note cards. And like, I love that idea. And sometimes I do that, but I can only do that like kind of to get unstuck or to get started, because I can't be organized with that. Like I lose the note cards. I lose and I can't like decide how to organize them. Like my brain will be like, oh, should it really be by chapter? Oh, actually maybe it should be by topic. Oh, but is that a topic or a subtopic? And then I'm lost. So like
That's
Colored
interesting
cards.
that you mentioned that as a barrier, the organization piece, because I have worked with some writers who felt differently, and they actually appreciated the physicality of the cards in terms of organization, like being able to put them on the floor and shuffle them around and, physically move the cards to see how things might be organized can be helpful. But
And I
as
do that
Amanda
with drafts. Like I'll cut up drafts into
similar.
pieces and lay them all out on the floor and move them around. And I just recently met with a student who did our grad writing institute 2 summers ago. And she's actually like, she had been really exploring a lot with digital mind mapping during that program. And she found like these amazing programs for digital mind mapping, and she's in computer science and very like tech savvy, tech oriented, tech brain. And when we met like a couple of weeks ago now, she wrote specifically and said, I want to meet and talk about some writing changes I'm experiencing. And she shared that she was feeling like weird because she had recently realized that she needed to write by hand again. And so she was like, I feel like I'm doing something wrong here. And then I shared with her the story of note cards with Muriel, and she was like, yes, that's it. That's it. And she said, can you guys do a workshop on analog writing? And I was like, we'll think about that. It's definitely incorporated into like all of our workshops overall, but like we don't have like one workshop that's like analog writing. What do you do? How do you do it? But she was like feeling so relieved to hear, when I shared that, many of the people we work with need to return to paper or need to stay with paper. She was like so relieved, and she was like, oh, I've been feeling like so out of it. And she said, oh, my younger colleagues laugh at me when I pull out a notebook and
Right.
pieces of paper and the handwriting. And I was like, well, like you're really smart. So you should do what works for you and let them laugh.
Well, I mean, that's so true. Like for those of us who had our foundational
Yeah.
education in the 1900s in the old days. We did all our papers by hand, right? I remember as an undergrad, it was still an option to submit by hand, handwritten essays. And it wasn't until I got to grad school that it became a requirement. So, just thinking about that, we had that, it was ingrained in our writing, our thinking processes. And now for the more recent generations, most of those students don't have at least the regular experience, the everyday experience writing by hand. So yeah, I guess that would be shocking to be like, I don't know what's wrong, doctor. I feel the need to write by hand.
But when I think about that too, like I know that I have to return to handwriting sometimes, but I've also been learning more about, like different forms of neurodivergence, and dysgraphia is a thing. It's like experiencing pain with handwriting, being unable to form the letters like in like the similar proper size, like making them proportional to each other and so on. And like in elementary school, like my only bad grade was in penmanship, but it was like a bad grade, and like my students have always teased me and said, you should have been a medical doctor, like because of my handwriting. And like literally sometimes I can't read my own handwriting if it's been too long since I wrote it. Like it's that bad when I'm just like writing for any extended period of time. Like, and it does hurt. Like it hurts to handwrite, but I always just thought that's what it is. And I didn't know that it didn't hurt for everybody when you write by hand. And so like, yeah, I think that's like an interesting thing too. I've been trying to remember that idea, just for like, for the folks who do think like they're supposed to be able to draft something, nice and neat and uh, like, yeah, I don't know. It's another like strange layer. Uh,
Yeah.
but I still
Yeah,
have to do
and
it by hand sometimes,
yeah,
even despite all that.
yeah. Well, and just it reminds us that we need to learn so much about like the difference between the I don't know what it's called, but like the process, right? That of
Mhm.
learning and all of the synapses and everything that happens in the brain versus how it's actually expressed, whether it's through the physical motions of writing by hand, which aren't possible for everybody, or if it's expressible through other motions, right? And we just have so much to learn, and most of us, like, that isn't even part of our training. We don't get talked to about those things, and if we're experiencing them, we're often afraid to bring them up. um,
Right.
like I imagine as an elementary kid, you weren't thinking about telling people, this is how I feel. You just figured, oh, I guess this is how it is.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I did find out uh we recently had the pleasure of editing the manuscript for Alan White. He's got a book coming out soon about his experience, like learning that he was dyspraxic, and just his experience of the world as a person, um, uh, who is dyspraxic. And like, I found out that he composes almost everything by voice and then edits, because also like dyspraxia makes typing difficult as well. So he had like the double whammy kind of, and in earlier, in school, basically like K through 12, like he kind of thought like he wasn't good at writing, he wasn't good at school, he wasn't good at those things, because he struggled to, write by hand for sure. And then as he got older, like typing was no better. Um, and but he's like when you read his manuscript, like you would just envision somebody like even at a typewriter, you know, like his, you know, I don't know, like I just find his like word choice and sentence flow and stuff like really like creative, and it feels like a writer, you know, like, and so it was really interesting when I found that out, that he was like, oh, I didn't really feel like I could write for a long time. And I had these barriers, and like dictation softwares, like just, you know, made a huge difference.
Well, that might be a great note for us to end on, the fact that, as we've all highlighted, every individual is different. Every individual may be different on a different day, at a different hour, in a different physical space. So that openness to trying new things might serve us all well as writers. And also the fact that maybe we need to rethink what writing even means. I'm thinking especially of your example, Karen, of you know, a really skillful writer who had to speak out the words. So I think it's exciting to think about the fact that tech, but also just a broader perspective can help us see that writing can be a much more inclusive experience, and also you know, a multimodal experience. It doesn't have to be about one way of doing things. So thank you all so much for this conversation. I invite all of our WSIP community members to join us, whether you'd like to hop on LinkedIn and make a comment on the original article, and we'll pop a link into the comments below this video. Or if you just want to send us an email or come in for an appointment and say, hey, I want to talk about writing, like what exactly does that mean for me? What are some options? We're very, very happy to have that conversation with all of you. All right, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jen. Bye-bye.